Hello, everybody, and welcome to my TED Talk. I appreciate you all taking the time and listening. I know we have a lot of these today, so I'll just go right ahead and jump into it. The topic I chose to focus my final project on was the relationship between organized labor and public relations, because I really truly feel that winning the communications battle is key to winning the labor relations battle, and that goes for either sides, whether you're on the side of the employer or the side of an organizer. If you could turn public opinion to your side and get people to believe in your cause, then odds are you're going to win that next contract. The thing is, corporate lobbying and deregulation stack the deck against labor organizers and make it extremely difficult to come up with successful labor movements in today's day and age. One of the reasons for this is something that's called class-based anti-union rhetoric, or CAR. I'll put a slide up on the screen so you could see. CAR is defined as anti-union rhetoric focused on workers themselves, frequently depicting them as overpaid, greedy, and undeserving of their demands. Now, CAR has three components. The first group is an in-group and out-group construction. And what that does is separate union workers from non-union workers. Even if people have similar class, similar shared interests, this in-group, out-group construction is extremely effective at creating animosity between two groups, which brings us to the second component, which is the modal sentiment that it conveys towards the out-group, which is that they're unduly compensated for their work and do not deserve more than quote-unquote the rest of us who are not in unions. So the end goal of CAR is to incite public opposition to specific union efforts and curb union power more generally. So CAR is really a concerted effort to take down organized labor, and it's different because it focuses blame on the individuals that are parts of unions rather than the institutions, which is a deviation from what people are typically used to seeing. So now we'll talk about the impacts of CAR. So a study on CAR showed that the broad political alignment of socioeconomic groups can basically be undone if they're portrayed as socioeconomically dissimilar to members of the other group. Generally Americans have broad support for the working class. People support blue-collar jobs, but when you bring CAR into play, these effects can be reversed. In fact, exposure to CAR actually altered the standing relationship between class identity and solidarity with organized labor. The people with highest working class identity in the survey actually were most likely to have strong backlash against unions following exposure to CAR. And now I have a quote at the bottom of the slide that talks about how this could screw up coalition building if people perceive each other to be different between activism groups and religious groups, environmental groups and education groups, so on and so forth, what have you. It's potentially cutting the cords on coalition building that could be really beneficial on a lot of different fronts. So we'll talk about some communication tactics to fight CAR, and I raised 3 points that I think can be effective in taking down this messaging. The first is to organize, and this is a quote from the general president of the Teamsters Union, who led the strike against UPS in 1997. And he said, first you have to get organized. You have to have something that brings you together. When you are organized, then you create the leverage that you need. And he did this, formed this organization by creating a national contract campaign. And it started by having his communications director hand out a month-by-month calendar with detailing events up until the strike deadline that gave tips on how to escalate pressure on the company and build a communications network and keep workers involved. Next would be to strategize. And a good example of this is in the Justice for Janitors movement, specifically in Los Angeles in the 90s. They were able to paint a picture to the media that depicted their union members as a multiracial, working class group of immigrants that really resonated with California residents and beyond California, helped them get the public support they needed to make gains in 1990, and that goodwill with the public actually has lasted throughout. And again, during labor negotiations in 2000, they were able to get a contract they needed thanks to the public opinion. And the last point I have is to mobilize. I'll go back to UPS and part of this contract campaign to combat UPS's pre-work communications meetings, which were similar to the tactics that Amazon used in its warehouse in Bessemer. That Parcels Director Ken Hall directed them to set up member-to-member communications networks. So volunteers in these would be responsible for communicating with 20 people at a time, and it was the largest ever initiative in the union, if not the entire U.S. labor movement. 185,000 rank-and-file union members were involved, and UPS ended up winning their contract negotiations after a short strike, and really what would be considered the biggest victory of working-class organized labor in this generation.